Welcome back to Track Talk and Happy New Year's. Today we're going to be continuing our 18 Ireland kick with a commentated game, and we'll just jump right into it. So David is leading us off in the auction, and I guess before we talk about the actual auction, let's look at the privates real quick. So City of Dublin gives you a port token that you can place in several areas of the map, $10 revenue. Again, we're comparing these revenues to expected share revenue of about $4 per share in the early game. So $10 is pretty good. William Dargan, I think we've seen this before, gives you an extra upgrade. And then the Irish Mail is one that we've not seen on the channel before, but will allow you to run to an off-board location. So it's not extra money to a stop, it's an extra actual stop. But maybe makes some of these towns a little bit better. And the big one for this is the revenue. So $20 of revenue compared to $4 of revenue for a share, particularly in the early game, is quite nice. Of course, it's a high cost to offset that, but again, company ownership in Ireland is not always desirable. And then we end up with the Dublin and Kingstown, which is in every game, and it's just the presidency. So David leading us off, he goes for the City of Dublin, looking for that extra port revenue. Emily follows with the DKR. I've never really understood why people bid on this so early. It's a very boring private. I don't think it's that good, but she does go for that. Agnes, she is going for Irish Mail. That's that private that we identified as having the high revenue. And Dora rounding us out on William Dargan. So potential for an early pull here with David. He would get some cheap privates with pretty reasonable revenue. I mean, you compare $15 of revenue for $70 to Dora's $95 for 10 revenue. Seems pretty good deal for David here. And he would be, right up against Agnes's revenue of $20 with much less spent. So if I was David, I think I would pull here. But he instead contests Irish Mail. He may feel like $20 of revenue for 115 is just too good of a deal, which, there may be some merit to that. But on the other hand, he's getting such a good deal by pulling here, he could fight Agnes in other ways throughout the game and just let the rest of the table suffer for giving him and Agnes good deals on their privates. Now we're on to Emily, and she has kind of the same dilemma as David of whether or not to pull here. I think it makes less sense for her to pull here. She'll leave with just $5 of revenue. May want to contest one of these other privates. We'll see. She does pull though. So I think probably two suboptimal plays there from those two players would be my gut instinct, but we'll see how it works out. We now have a contested auction for the Irish Mail. We'll see how high these players want to go for this. Again, that revenue is pretty attractive. Agnes up to 125, David 130, and it looks like 145 is going to take it. So this leaves Agnes with priority deal. She did end up with that expensive private, which puts her, well, I guess she can still technically bid the minimum for a a minor company. So we'll be able to be a president of something if she wants. But I think in her position, I may just buy paying shares. She goes for the DKR. DKR going to be running for 40 for a while. Dora now has the option of floating companies, and I guess we should take this opportunity to look at which companies are actually available. So the SLNCR is one of those E-tile companies or EM tile companies up here, and is going to be running out of a home station that is not very lucrative, only 10 in yellow as opposed to yellow $20 for a normal yellow city. Does have a good number of DITs surrounding it, so can get some of that narrow gauge revenue going pretty early. But we'll see. Not a terrible company, not an amazing company, I guess. DDR, I think that's the other Dublin company, just north of the DKR. In WKR, we talked about this company at length in the last video, starts in the southeast. EBSR is another EM company, and I believe it shares the silencer home token. So if the silencer starts early, builds a lot of track, this becomes suddenly a much more attractive company since you can take advantage of all the SLNCR's builds. Londonderry, that's in the north, Ulster, northeast, and we can leave the rest of these companies for later. So we'll see if Dora wants the SLNCR or not. Looks like she's passing for now. Surprised to see that. I guess she's hoping one of the other players falls on the SLNCR and then she'll pick one of these later companies. The DDR in particular is not that exciting in yellow. It does run out of Dublin, but this DD track is kind of a killjoy. So I don't know why she'd pass on the SLNCR in favor of the DDR. We'll see. David, he is buying the paying share of the DKR. Emily will go back and secure the presidency. So we're back to Dora, has missed out on paying shares and now still has the option to float in the SLNCR. Questionable decision there to pass. Does end up taking it, could have taken it last time. And is actually getting some competition from David for this company, which is interesting. Okay. But Dora does overbid and is now parring at 70. High par in this game does increase your treasury a little bit, but because the revenue is so low and you have to run for at least your share price to move forward, a high par price is sometimes a double-edged sword. This leaves David with the option of floating the DDR or investing in this SLNCR. And actually could buy 2 shares in the SLNCR and potentially pressure that presidency in the next stock round. I suppose that Dora would have priority on him. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll see. Looks like he just bought the 1. No, he did buy up to 2. So we'll see if he's interested in pressuring for this presidency. He could sell the DKR, get $60 for that. And actually, it'll be 65 because it won't fall back because it has the 2 train, and then buy that extra share. Dora won't be able to defend, and Agnes can't steal it, but could spoil it for David if he wants. So he's in the driver's seat there. Regardless, we're into the first operating round, and ESLNCR is up, laying its home tile. And interestingly, instead of taking the easy narrow gauge towards the dits for free, it's going to be laying straight gauge or regular gauge to this dit here. I suppose this opens up a potential route into Dublin for the late game. We'll have to see how that track develops. It'll be interesting, especially because this other company is going to be coming out down the pike like we identified, and will be eager to take advantage of any track this company builds. So this company is going to determine the value of that company. Buys the 2H, no options there. DKR, most boring company in 18XX, nothing to do, just runs for 40 and pays it out. Does buy a, oh, I see. So operating order changed because this company floated up and this company fell back. We are into the second operating round here. DKR still operating for 40, no changes there. SLNCR is laying towards Drummond and then does set up for a narrow gauge connection in the next OR. So I had to pay $20 for laying 2 tracks, but with a 2H train, we'll be able to hit both of these dits. So I suppose that's potentially a little more revenue than just heading towards the narrow gauge. Running for $30, under our anticipated $40 for shares, a little bit suboptimal there. And he does pick up a second 2 train. So if we look at the map here, he is going to presumably be laying this dit for free and then running up to Doskal with regular gauge track to run both of his 2 trains. Should have pretty good revenue there. So David may be interested in selling out of the DKR and instead buying this SLNCR. We'll see if he gets the opportunity to do that. I imagine one of these other players is going to have something to say about that. Yeah, so that's spoiled for David. Agnes could, in theory, par a new company. It's going to pass for now. No other place to put money. Dora passing, David passing. So everyone just shifts one place earlier in priority, and we're into the next operating round. Kind of a boring stock round. Not a whole lot going on in the operating rounds early in this game, which I think is one of the reasons it's not played very frequently on 18xx.games. It's just kind of a slog in the early game. I do think there's some good things in this game, but these minor companies don't get up to a whole lot early on. DKR doing nothing, running for 40. SLNCR presumably laying 2 tracks here, does have the cash for it. and is going to run 2 trains for 70. So now exceeding expectations, so to speak. Pretty good revenue, good for Dora and David. SLNCR was able to exceed his stock price, so it's operating again, has skipped ahead of DKR, and is heading up north towards Londonderry and the LER. And if we look at the entities, LER is 3 companies away from floating, so we'll see if the players push through to float that. Pays for 70 again, and DKR is going to round us out with a $40 revenue. Back into stock round 3, Agnes is up, does have plenty of cash to float a company should she like, would have to take the WKR. Interesting opportunities for the WKR in terms of laying city tiles that run to each other in Wexford and Waterford, and then taking advantage of this narrow gauge track here. We saw that, I think, in the last game we casted. Otherwise has no investment opportunities, so needs to either pass and hope that somebody takes an action so they don't just pass into the next stock round, or float the WKR. Selling out of the DKR and is floating the WKR, or at least auctioning it at $60 a share. See if anybody can test this. So far, nobody has, and it floats for $120 or $60 a share. I think that Dora stole it, actually. Is that right? So I'm struggling to... Oh, I see. Agnes sold the share, and then Dora auctioned it. Okay. Sorry, I'm losing track a little bit here. David, he sells out of the SLNCR. Interesting. Pretty high revenue in that company. Presumably preparing to float something else. And Emily is going to buy a WKR and help capitalize that company. Agnes sold and passed last round, so now has the opportunity of taking that EBSR if she wants it. Is going to par it, and we'll see if David wants to try overbidding for it. Looks like he's interested, at least for now. Gets bid up to 155, and David does steal it. Okay. So pretty high price, but a healthy treasury, and is set up for good runs, just like the SLNCR. Okay. Agnes now has to go back and find a place to invest her cash. Does have the option of investing in some of these newly floated companies, but they won't run, so at least not for the first operating round in the set. So may just float her own company, and looks like she does. Very high par, $100. Okay. So LER is up and is setting some narrow gauge track up for itself to the east. Does he buy more than 2 trains? Shouldn't. Can only run one of them. So just buying one for now. SLNCR still going to be running for $70. Pays it out. EBSR, newly floated company in the EM tile. He is issuing a share. Does that mean he wants 2 of these 2 trains? He's just buying one for now. DKR, nothing doing down there. Pays for 40. WKR is actually going to be laying broad gauge track towards the north. When this company floats early, it's more typical to see it lay the broad gauge towards Wexford, which we had alluded to. But actually, that track was consumed by Londonderry, so it didn't even have that option. And when you float later like this, it may make more sense to take that broad gauge to set up for some late game runs. This tile here is very expensive to lay, obviously, with broad gauge. But given the potential benefit of getting runs into Dublin, sometimes you'll see that laid. We'll have to see. We'll keep a close eye on that track. Is going to pick up a 2 train here, and I think they just sit on 1 2 train. Yes, so we have 1 2 train left before the 3s come out, and for that reason won't be seeing any merges, it doesn't look like, just yet, even though we do have our first valid merge between the LER and one of these companies here, potential. LER, no track for him, running for 40, pays it out. SLNCR is does have track that it could lay, But, well, actually, I take that back. The cost of this track is going to prevent him from laying it, but does have options in the future. Running for 70 still, DKR running for 40, EBSR with a single two train. He is not laying any track, doesn't feel like paying that $40 cost, and will run for 40, which he pays. WKR has some free track he can lay. So it looks like he is going to slowly work his way up to Dublin, and there should be a green track upgrade for that DIT that will connect him into Dublin. So I think he would need. I think this, for instance, would get him there. So there should be more than one option. Yeah, so this track and this track would both get him there. Um, so shouldn't have to worry about losing out on the track to connect into Dublin if he doesn't want. Pays for 40, and we're into stock round 4. Still no mergers. So looking at the game state here, Dora, David are tied exactly in net worth. Both are at 4 shares, and Dora has a little less liquidity, so really cannot float a company right this second, and may just look for a paying share. David does have the option of floating the UR, the Ulster. Ulster starts up in, well, I guess Ulster, or it's Belfast, sorry, in the East Coast. Not the most attractive of options right now, especially since this track from Londonderry is narrow gauge. He's going to have to develop all of his own track. I don't know if we're going to necessarily see that. Otherwise, the SLNCR is a pretty attractive investment. Does open himself up to a dump if you were to buy that, but we'll see. Dora snags that share, secures her presidency. David, he's going to go for the DKR. Emily, taking the WKR. Still some investment opportunities for these players, but we may run into a situation where all these shares get bought up and they are forced to float new companies just to have a place to store their cash. EBSR now taken, and Dora out of cash. David, he could go back for an EBSR, which he does, takes it from the market. Emily is going to take the last WKR, and it looks like everybody's out of cash, which should leave Agnes with priority. Okay, operating round 4, LER. And let's just look at these companies' cash. Is anybody in a position to buy into the threes? Nobody can do it on their own. But if someone gets greedy and buys a 2, we could potentially see someone else pick up that 3. I don't think we're going to see that. Should be a pretty easy operating round. LER, nothing to do. Runs for 40, pays it out. SLNCR, still happy to just run for the most money in the game, running for 70. DKR, nothing good, nothing going on. EBSR, also not interested in laying track and just going to run for 40, which he pays. Still sitting on a 2 train. WKR does set up for the link into Dublin as expected, and also is not going to be buying a train. So we are still sitting on that quote unquote poison 2 train. That's not really a thing, I wouldn't say, but be it as it may, nobody's buying it. And I think we're going to see basically no track laid and no train spot in this next operating round. So we should be able to move through it pretty quickly. Paying for 40, SLNCR, paying for 70, DKR, paying for 40, EBSR, paying for 40, and WKR, no track left for him, so just paying for 40. Still no mergers. We're into stock round 5, and this is what I'm talking about with this game having kind of a slow start. Not a whole lot going on. Agnes now, with priority, can sell out of the EBSR and look to start floating something else in the next go around. The other players are in a much better position to float without selling. They just have a little more liquidity. In terms of net worth, really not a huge lead. Agnes is falling behind, but the rest of the players are all within $100 of each other. So Agnes is capitalizing her LER has a good treasury in that company, but kind of limited run potential now that she's had two of her opponents float in the EM. Not going to be able to run through there ever. Dora buying the EBSR. David, he is selling out of the DKR and setting himself up for a new company float in the next go around in the stock round. He is going to buy an LER for now. Emily buying the LER as well. So really only 2 shares left for people to buy before people are forced to float a new company. Agnes out of cash. Dora does buy one of those shares. David cannot, as he sold it earlier, and does float the WLR. And Emily goes back for a WLR share. So I think with this new company floating, we should finally break into the 4Hs. I may have been, in retrospect, referring to them as 3 trains, just showing my 1830 roots, but they are actually 4H trains. And I think with the WLR floating, we're going to see that in the next operating round. Everyone's passing. Agnes retains priority. LER is up and is running for 40. SL and CR, nothing to do until WLR changes the game state. So operating out of Limerick, laying, it looks like towards Cork, okay. Buys a 2 and does not have the cash for a 3, actually does have the cash for the 4H. So buys that, and we're off to the races. Now the game can open up a little bit. We have green track available for the EBSR. Maybe going to upgrade his home. He does, and we'll be able to run for a little bit more. Kind of nice for David that he was able to get the upgrade before the SLNCR was, so he gets a little extra revenue compared to his opponent and neighbor. Running for 50 now. He also buys a 4. WKR should be able to upgrade Kingstown now and get into Dublin. He does. Does he also buy a 4 train? He does. So how many of these are left? I think we've seen 3 of them bought now. So 2 of them are on the market. Yeah, but we are nearing our first rusting event. DKR, just upgrading his home. Is finally going to run for something other than 40. And he also buys a 4 train, so revenue for him should be quite a bit better in the next operating round. LER, he upgrades his home, and I was not paying attention if anybody bought in their privates in the last operating round. Doesn't look like anybody did, but we may start seeing that now. He has a very high treasury and may buy in his very expensive private for a big boost into the next stock round. I think that would be very reasonable to expect. He also can take advantage of the offboard for the LER, given that we've established that his runs are a little bit limited, that he's tokened out in the EM tile. One thing to note is that with this high treasury, this is going to be potential target for a merge steal. If we look at that, the only 2 companies that the LER can merge with are the EBSR and the SL and CR. So let's just look at the share distribution there. SL and CR is Dora. She has no shares in the LER, so not in a position to steal that. And the EBSR is David. David has 3 shares here, 1 share here, that's 40. And then Agnes has 40 as well. So in theory, if David were to propose the merger, he'd end up with the presidency of the combined company because the shares are distributed in priority order. But since Agnes has priority on him, that presidency should be secured, and she could, in theory, steal that company from David, which would really rehabilitate the LER and give it runs down south. So we may see that happen. Of course, since Agnes and David are tied in shares in the combined companies, whether or not the merger goes through is going to come down to Dora and Emily, whether or not they vote for it. So something to pay attention to in the merger round. Regardless, Londonderry is being upgraded, running a 2 for 50 and buying the 4. Does that mean there's no 4s left? Yes, we are facing 6s. 6s are $300? Yes. So he cannot just buy through to the 4. Could have if he had withheld, and that would have been pretty strong. The SLNCR would have fallen back trainless, and Agnes has no shares invested in that, and all the rest of these companies would still run, but they wouldn't get 2 runs. Um, it would prevent him from buying in the private, the Irish Mail, if he were to buy a 6. So let's see. But he actually doesn't even buy in the private either. So I think that's probably a mistake. I think you should be doing one of those two things rather than sitting on $300 in your presidency. Could very easily loot the company or hurt the other companies by rusting their trains. And let's talk about that for a second, because if he loots this company and leaves it with no cash, then merges it with the EBSR, he's still going to be in a position to dump it. So that seems like that would be quite strong. Loot the company. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the company that he dumps would have 2 4 trains in it, but he would have a ton of cash to push trains in a new company. I don't know. The routes in this game get so restrictive that dumping companies is sometimes not advantageous, because you dump a company and then you start a new company that has no prospects. So you'd have to really think about that in a little more detail, but I think it's definitely a mistake not to either buy your private or the train here. Very passive, just to sit with that cash in the treasury. SLNCR is up and is going to be able to take advantage of these new tracks, running for 90 now. Actually withholds that. That's interesting. So with a withhold, still does not have cash for a 6 train, but can buy in their expensive private. So maybe just looking to deny the revenue from the other investors and just greedily siphon it into their own coffers with this purchase of the private, which is exactly what happens. WLR is laying down to Cork, pays the $20 for the double track lay, and only can run one of his 2 trains. Runs for 60, pays it out. So noticing that the WLR and the DKR are only going to have 1 run, even though they have 2 trains, I think it makes less sense for the LER to buy that 6 with the effort of rusting other people's trains. And probably the better option would have been just to buy in the private. I think that we can say that in retrospect. EBSR, he on the other hand is running both trains and is going to be running for, well, sorry, he's buying in his private and assigns it up to Londonderry. So that helps the LER a little bit in the future. Running for 140, pretty good revenue, which he pays. WKR upgrades his home, just running 1 train, but able to run for further, so running for 60, pays it out. DKR laying some narrow gauge track. Interestingly, not laying it towards the DIT. This company has not been bought in yet, the DAR, but he controls that. So may eventually regret not having this narrow gauge revenue. Runs to 4 for 70, and we are into the merger round. So a big question is whether or not these 2 companies merge. I think they probably will. And then follow-up question is whether the resulting company gets dumped. So the exact merger we were expecting, Agnes is going to vote for it, and we will see if these minor investors, Dora and Emily, want to support it or not. Dora does, and we will actually need Emily to also vote for it in order to get more than 50% of the votes to cause it to merge. David is happy to merge it away, though. He's going to lose the presidency willingly. And there is another merger that is possible, the DKR and the WKR. These companies are owned by the same presidency, or the same president. So probably we'll see this merger as well. it cannot be prevented, um, if only to minimize the train liability as we go into our next resting events. Um, so I imagine we will see a merger there. Emily proposing the merger we expected, and we have two 10 share companies in the game now. Uh, we will see now whether or not Agnes is going to sit on this presidency, which is split with David, or if she's going to dump. By selling here, she would open up a lot of liquidity to float a new company. Um, but again, this company with tokens in the EM in Londonderry, potentially a third token in Drummond, is pretty set for the late game runs. So we'll see what the decision is. Looks like it is a dump, and we'll see when she goes back to invest that cash in. Door's up and is going to be immediately auctioning um, the GNWR for max value. GNWR is that Drummond company, so highly likely to be active in the upcoming operating rounds. And nobody is really probably going to overbid this. Actually, David does. Interesting. So he just obtained that new 10 share company and is willing to use the rest of his cash for this 5 share company. Pretty aggressive. And Dora and David are still bidding pretty high, actually. And David wins it for 225. Wow. All right. So he's out of cash now. In theory, Dora could pressure that presidency still. Um, David lost a little bit of value by bidding 225 for a company that only pars for 100, so $25 of net worth loss there. But by selling shares, he would still be able to defend that presidency should he want. We'll see if there's any pressure applied there. He buys an SLNCR, or sorry, is selling an SLNCR, and will buy another GNWR. So I think that presidency is probably now safe. Dora could buy 300 without selling. I don't know if she's going to be motivated to sell heavily out of these other companies in order to steal that company. Emily is buying the last CBSCR. This does have 2 4 trains. Unfortunately, its track is really not as attractive as the WLWRs. It's just running from Dublin to Wexford, and it's going to have to pay for some pretty expensive track to develop any other routes for itself for its other trains. Could, in theory, get into Cork here, but also possible for the Limerick company to block that. So, really, no guarantees that it gets any real exciting routes. Agnes, $500. We'll see what she floats here. Buying the SLNCR. Okay. It's probably going to have trouble investing all that cash without floating a new company. There's just not a whole lot for her to buy now that she has sold out of WLWR. I suppose she could be the one to try and pressure this presidency in the GNWR. That would be interesting. She'd end up with a very capitalized company. So Dora lost out on the GNWR and is going back for the DER. DER is one of those companies just north of Dublin here. So much less attractive float than this GNWR was. Maybe should have bid up a little bit higher for that. Does become the president of that. We're back to David, who has invested all of his cash. Emily buying the GNWR, getting a little bit of a help capitalizing that company. And he is still operating first and well ahead of any of the other companies. So I don't think we're going to be seeing any of these 2 trains run. A little bit of a mistake from Dora to sit on 2 trains, and presumably is now falling back trainless. Even selling down these companies multiple times is not going to cause them to operate for less than the SLNCR. Would have to be sold down 4 times, it looks like, which is highly, highly unlikely. Agnes has the capital to do it, but I don't know if she has the desire. And actually, the GNWR is only a 5 share company, so that's not even possible there. Agnes investing cash in the WLR. Dora selling out of the CBSCR. Interesting. So was buying that share and now just trashing it. Does hurt the share value a little bit. Hmm, not sure. I think she's being a little indecisive here. Maybe worried that Agnes is likely to go last in priority, but that would give her a priority deal. So actually, it would not be a liability for a dump for her. Yeah, not sure. Buying the DER, I guess just wants to capitalize her new company, is going to have to afford an expensive six train. David, he's able to buy a share now that Dora has sold. So I think when you're playing 18XXX or 18XX, not three X's, got to be careful with that. Speaking of being careful, when you're playing this game, you got to be sure not to give other people cheap shares. David wasn't able to buy anything because he'd spent all of his cash, but now Dora bought and then sold, giving him the ability to buy that share. Emily passing Agnes, buying that other cheap share. Dora selling again, sitting on a bare presidency. This is not the most attractive company right now with just two trains. And I guess she's going to be looking to, well, actually, she can't even buy more shares in the DER. So I don't know. Maybe the GNWR. And it looks like people are just passing, sitting on a lot of cash, which raises the question of why these shares were being sold when they could have just left their cash invested. And I also think I misspoke earlier. Both of these companies are 5 share companies. For some reason, I thought one of them was a 10 share company, but the two 10 share companies are later in priority. All right, GNWR is up, operating in Drummond, going to lay his home, and no other track for now. First 6 train is bought, and all those 2 trains rust. So I think the SLNCR in particular is hurting from that. DER, second newly floated company, is laying his home and also buying a 6. WLR, looks like they are going to upgrade their home. Still has the opportunity to block this connection if they want, but for now is going to be running for 70 and pays it. SLNCR, trainless, does have those prime trains available to buy for 40. That's pretty underwhelming. We'll see. So laying a dit here and presumably heading over towards Dublin in the long term with that. Does buy the prime train. WLR, 2-4 trains, going to have probably the highest revenue in the game right now. Runs for 170 and actually withholds it. Maybe he wants to redeem some market shares in the future. Not really sure what the logic is there. He's got 40% of the company and everybody else just shares 1 share of it. He has token money. I have to assume we're going to see that token in Drummond. Would be a big mistake not to drop that. But for now, just withholding. CBSCR, 2-4 trains, but pretty anemic runs. So running for 110, pays it out, and we're into the second round. Drummond is looking to get into Limerick, it looks like. Runs for 80 and pays it. Does make sense that GNWR would be eager to link up with Limerick. Same president, David. So we may see cooperation between those 2 companies as a result. DER, probably heading over towards this regular gauge track. Unfortunately for him, minor company, so unable to token in Drummond. Otherwise, that would be a nice feather in his cap. Runs for 60, pays it. WLR is indeed linking up with his other company. Has a little bit of a opportunity to merge there now. SLNCR running just the prime train. Does get to upgrade at least. Runs for 40, pays it out. CBCR has been left the opportunity of linking up with Cork here and actually even potentially into Limerick, and does have a token but doesn't have cash for it. So if someone was going to withhold, I'm surprised that it was David on the WLR and not Emily on the CBSCR, because that token could be potentially very, very strong. Um, be a real coup for the CBSCR to end up with a token in Drummond instead of the WLR, but regardless, not to be. So it does link up with Limerick and runs for 70. I will highlight this track. This is an interesting Ireland, feature. This uh, I'm not sure how to describe it. Converging track maybe is usually brown in the 1830 family, but you get access to it in green. So WLR has access to both Cork and Limerick a phase earlier than would otherwise be possible. WLR running 2 to 4 trains does lay a little lollipop to increase the revenue of Drummond and is running for 180 as a result. Does snag that token in Drummond that we were talking about. Pays out after withholding last time. And we are into the merger round. So WLR and GNRW are the same president, should have no trouble merging these two companies, and makes a lot of sense to do so, as they will have pretty darn good runs on that west side of the map. Looks like the merger is proposed that we were expecting, should have no trouble going through. It does. And we have the potential for a merger between Dora's two companies, and probably also going to see this just so that this prime train doesn't become a liability here. This is maybe a little bit of a less exciting company. Well, no, I'll take that back. It's pretty good. So we'll have access up north and into Dublin once these tokens are combined. This merger is also guaranteed, so should happen. We are into the stock round, and let's just take a look here. We have two players that are kind of inexplicably sitting on private companies still. That really jumps out to me. This one in particular, the revenue is only $5. You want that cash for a share instead of sitting on that. And the special ability here is kind of worthless based on the way the track has been laid. This is not a valuable tile right now. So this is very hard for me to explain. This is the same player that we were talking about should have withheld for the token. So this makes a withhold even more valuable, right? Of course, when you own 70% of a company, you're reluctant to withhold. But if you can buy in your private and it gives you a valuable token, that's definitely something you should be considering. And then the Irish Mail, this should have been bought in a long time ago. She lost her presidency and also just sat on a ton of cash in the last stock round, so was unable to buy it in the last operating round, of course, but this should have been done much earlier. This is kind of inexcusable. And as a result, she's in last place, so no big surprise there. Looks like Emily is leading us in net worth, but not in liquidity. And Agnes, as mentioned, is going to have the most cash starting off here. David, he's in second place in terms of net worth, has priority here. He has 2 presidencies, and they're both pretty good. He's got a 6 train here, so he's not worried about the 8s coming out, and he's got a ton of cash in the WLWR. So even when that 8 train comes out, he should have no trouble affording a permanent train. He's got good map position, so probably just looking to buy some of his own shares, potentially these cheap WLR market shares right now. Looks like that's exactly what he does. Emily, going to follow up with that. That company might just sell out right away. Agnes sells out of the CBSCR. This company is in, I guess, a little bit of danger with 2 4 trains and no treasury. When that 8 train comes out, could be in a world of hurt. And if Agnes is selling out to float a company and then push trains, I guess that makes a lot of sense. We'll see. We'll have to wait to see in the next go around if she's going to be able to float her own company. Dora is buying the MRNC. Okay, that was just sold by Agnes a moment ago. David has been given the opportunity to buy yet another WLWR share, which I think he will do. He does. Emily is passing. That's a little bit less easy to explain for me. Agnes now is floating a company, and it's going to be a 10 share company, which she puts in Waterford. Okay, So that is going to be able to take advantage of the track laid into Dublin, and then also, in theory, could steal a token in Limerick, which would be bad news for the CBSCR, which is already going to be probably falling back trainless. So bad news for Emily. Dora is passing. David buys the MRNC. So a little bit interesting, he doesn't choose to buy the last WLWR, would float his company up and would give him the cash or the capitalization for an 8 train when these 4s rust. Plus, it's probably just a better share. I think it's going to run for more. I suppose does leave himself the option of selling this just to deplete the treasury and then go back for the WLWR if the other players let him. Emily passing still. Agnes is going to secure that last share of the WLWR and still has $200 she can put into her GNRI. It's going to want to buy at least one more share so that she can afford her 6 train, of course. Dora passing. So a lot of early passing. People are just sitting on cash here, which is a little bit weird. I guess I should cut Emily some slack. She is share locked, so fair enough. But this one, Dora, is a little bit harder for me to understand. David passing, of course. Emily passing. Agnes probably just buying her GNRI. Does. Yeah, so I'm not sure what Dora's thinking here. She's going to end up a priority either way. Should probably find a way to invest this cash. Does she have nowhere to put it? She could buy this CBSCR. However, that's not going to run probably, so maybe doesn't want to open herself up for that. And could definitely buy the GSWR. Yeah, I don't know. She has options. Emily, still train locked or share locked. And Agnes, enough money for one more share, is going to pass, it looks like. Okay. We'll see if she's able to buy in her expensive private now that she has a new treasury. We'll have to issue a share to buy it in for max value, but maybe wants to do that anyways. GNRI is up, issues a share, buys in the private, and leaves herself enough money for a double track lay in the future, as well as that 6 train. So does appear to have recognized that she needed to buy in her private, maybe just forgot to do it, and then lost the presidency and had to wait for a new presidency to do it. Otherwise, hard to explain. May just be a little blunder there. Regardless, we do see that new offboard for Waterford and laying some narrow gauge track. Buys a 6, so we're sitting on the last 6 now, and we're onto the GSWR. She snagged a token in Limerick. Okay. I think we had predicted that. So the CBSCR is cut off now. Does have access to Dublin and will be able to run through it. So not the end of the world for that company, but it's going to be a long time before it has any ability to run through Dublin. GSWR, he is laying a lollipop, runs his 2 trains for 190, pays it out. WLWR has a ton of cash and could pick up that last 6 train if he wanted, but I imagine he's going to sit and just wait for someone to rust his trains and buy the first 8. He does have the opportunity to shuffle trains, so could buy the 6 out of the GSWR now that the 6 is already run, and then shuffle all the cash in the GSWR and buy the 8 in the next operating round. That would be pretty slick. It would really hurt the CBSCR who's sitting on 2 4 trains, so we may see that. We'll have to keep our eyes open for that. Laying narrow gauge track, runs for 180, pays it, and does not shuffle trains. So I think that's a little bit of a missed opportunity there, but play the game you want to play. MRC is redeeming a share and is actually getting pretty good value from that 1 prime train. So hard to criticize when you're able to run it for $60, for instance, and it only costs like 70. Or maybe it's even cheaper. Yeah, it's 40. Okay, even cheaper. CBSCR running for 150. May need to consider withholding. It's going to be needing an expensive train here in just a minute, and it's already 10 shares, so it's not going to be all merged away. On to the next operating round. We somehow still have players with company owned or privately owned privates, which have not been bought in, but that will be going away quite soon, I'm sure. GSWR, he is upgrading the lollipop and going to be picking up a bunch of dits out here in the west, so that EM tile is going to become much more lucrative than it otherwise would be. Runs for 200 now, pays it out, and still has treasury shares, so some of this money is going into his company, which is really quite nice. GNRI with a 6 train. Looks like he is also going to be picking up some of these western dits. Runs for 100, pays it. WLWR did not give himself the opportunity to shuffle trains around. May see him pick up the 6 now, anticipating other companies floating in the next stock round. We'll have to see. Running for 200, pretty monstrous. Actually, 220, sorry. Pays it out and does not shuffle trains. MRNC. Also, we've seen 3 companies now heading west for these dits. I think that's maybe something I haven't really appreciated in my playthroughs, is how concentrated the dits are in the west. Pays 220, really quite good revenue. That 6 train is running well. And we are into the last operation with the CBSCR, laying the other EM tile, Maryborough, and runs for 150, pays it out. No mergers, so we're into stock round 8. And everybody has a ton of cash, so should be seeing some new 10-share companies come out and a pretty explosive train rush. The bank is quite low here, so oftentimes when there's a stall on the non-permanent trains, you run the risk of breaking the bank early. Right now, the game is quite close between David and Emily in terms of net worth. So I don't think either of those players would feel very confident trying to win this game early by just letting the bank break. One of them or both of them is going to have to push these trains to try and extend things so they can get a more convincing lead. And I think David in particular is in a great position to do that, because if he rusts the 4 trains early in the operating round, Emily's going to fall back trainless, and her net worth is going to take a huge hit when she has to buy a either expensive permanent train or one of these prime trains. So I think David is almost certainly in the driver's seat here, very much the favorite to win the game. Agnes has really negligible net worth in comparison, not the greatest map position. And then Dora has already had to buy a prime train. It's really not in a position to afford a permanent train. And we'll just probably slowly see her fall behind. But she is up now, and she will be selling out of the CBSCR, buying a GNRI. David, he is also selling out of the CBSCR, so I think both of these players are anticipating this company falling back trainless. And he will buy a GSWR, his own company, getting a little more cash into that company by buying from the treasury. Emily is passing on $600. Surely there is ways to optimize her portfolio. So we've just identified the CBSCR as being a liability. Perhaps you want to sell at least one share of that to buy a better paying share. Hard to explain, having absolutely no actions to take in the stock round. Agnes is floating the NGWR 10-share company, and floats it in Cork, which is down here in the south. Doesn't cut anybody's runs, and also is tokened out literally everywhere. This track will not upgrade. So very poor late game potential for this company. Yeah, I mean, she's in a rough position, doesn't have too many options. But this does, I think, kick off the train rush. Dora buying the MGWR, so going to help capitalize that, it looks like. Otherwise, really quite an unattractive company to be investing in. David going back for GSWR, now max ownership of that, has pretty healthy treasuries in both of his companies. The rich are getting richer. Emily still passing. Agnes is selling out of the WLWR and is investing that in the newly floated MGWR. Dora still buying those shares. Again, this company is going to be really bad, so not sure that it makes sense to invest so heavily in it. David passing, Emily passing, Agnes up to 40% of that company. Dora still pressuring. Yeah, hard to say. We had the two players in last place kind of fighting each other here. And Agnes is up to 50%, Dora 40. And did Dora buy the fifth share? She did not. So not at her cert limit, sitting on $100 cash, invested in a bad company. That is a one-way ticket to losing the game, I think. Both of these players are functionally eliminated. GSWR is laying track, and I don't see where it is. I have to, oh, I see. It's a dip down here in the west, running for 220, and his treasure is now depleted. So we'll see how he's going to afford his permanent trains. Looks like he's paying, not withholding for now. MGWR, newly floated company, should be buying that last 6. Does, and now has the cash for the 8 as well. So we see that rusting event occur. Does hurt David and Emily on the CBSCR, but David, of course, with the treasury is going to be able to pick up an A train of his own. So maybe that's why these players were so eager to invest here, is they thought they were going to be pressuring the leader by rusting his trains. I don't think we're going to see that come to fruition. GNRI redeeming a share and upgrading Limerick. Runs for the 6 train for 120, pays it out. MRNC, I think this is the company that had that one prime train that was running for so much. Now doesn't have that now that it's rusted. Upgrading DITS and runs for just 170, which it pays. WLWR, also upgrading DITS and buys a permanent train, so he's set. CBSCR falls back trainless, upgrades Cork, and buys a 2 prime. So that company is circling the drain, which is going to be the end for Emily. This 2 prime train is going to rust, is not going to run very well, and she's max invested in that company. GSWR is up. And before we get into this operating round, let's just look at the market. $1,600 left. So we are close to the bank breaking, but I don't think that the revenue from these 6 companies is going to be enough to break it. So pushing through to the 8 did extend the game. We see some brown dits now, running a 6 for 130, pays it. GNRI is upgrading Maryborough, so potential for a link in this central portion of the map for the MGWR to get into Dublin, which it looks like is probably going to be her goal since she's the president of that company. Running for 130, pays it. MRNC, upgrading DITS, runs for 190, pays it out. MGWR does in fact get a run into Dublin and has a token. So we'll need to drop a token in Maryborough for in order to use both for trains, which is what we see. Runs for 220, decent revenue, but really not going to be sufficient for the game, and she's already so far behind anyways. WLWR running a shiny new 8 train is going to be upgrading in the west here, so 3 dits in a row. Going to be really nice revenue in the EM track now. Runs for 200, is actually withholding. I think that's because his other company still needs a permanent train. Yes. So may want to shuffle this 2 prime train into the WLWR, get $500 in this company, and then can push for the 10 train. 2 prime in, and that's what we see, a shuffle of the 2 prime. CBSCR is not doing anything with the track and just runs his 2 train for $50. We are into stock round 9, and there's $800 left in the bank. So if trains don't get pushed early in the operating round, may see the bank break in operating round 9. However, several players have cash to infuse into the bank by buying shares, so that seems unlikely. Probably will be going for this operating round and then one more. David is share locked, and he actually is invested in pretty good companies, so he may be less interested in selling out and buying things. The MRNC does have a non-permanent train as we are staring down a rusting event shortly. May make sense to sell that and buy a permanent a train. I'm sorry, a company with a permanent train such as the MGWR. So he does sell and he buys the GNRI, which is another company without a permanent train. Emily, she is going to buy the WLWR. David could also have bought that, I suppose. Agnes buying the MGWR. That company does have a permanent train. Its route is looking potentially a little bit better than I anticipated, but still going to be, I think, lackluster. Dora, last share for her, buys the GNWRI. Not sure what the interest in this company is. I suppose they're just looking to give it the cash to buy a train so that the game doesn't end. Although, really, David should be hoping the game does end because I think he's in a pretty dominant position. David passing. Emily is passing. Agnes, not yet at her share limit, is going to buy another GNRI. Going to be way in last place, it looks like. Dora is actually selling MGWR. Okay, and let's see how she invests all this cash. So, I mean, it's interesting, right? Dora invested quite heavily in the MGWR in the round where it was floating, so it's only going to run once, and presumably is not going to have very good routes early in its existence. Invested in that company, now is selling out of it that it has, better prospects, and is going to be looking towards what? She's buying shares in her own MRNCC, which is going to be falling back trainless when it rusts, and then is also going to have the opportunity to buy, the GNRI, similar situation, or the CBSCR, which is, basically a dead company. Yeah, very questionable. David passing, Emily passing, Agnes passing, and Dora is left far off her cert limit as a result of her decision to sell. She is going back for the GNRI. I think everybody else is just passing, so let's just look and see what Dora did. Still not able to meet her cert limit, which is kind of inexcusable at this point. And it looks like she just bought up max shares in the GNRI. So exchanged presumably decent shares in the MGWR to put herself in a company without a permanent train and in a dumpable position. She did capitalize the GNRI to the point where it now can afford a permanent train. But is that really in Dora's interest when she is hoping that the 6 train doesn't rust? Probably not. So questionable. GSWR is leading us off. Laying into Clifton. Finally have this long train of Ditz laid, and he is going to be running for 140, which he pays. He does buy that 8, so I believe we're looking at this 10 train now. Yes. And it looks like the GNRI will have the capital to bring that out. So we will be seeing our last really meaningful rusting event occur here. GNRI runs for 130, pays it, and we do see those 6s rust. MRNC falling back trainless, could buy a 3 prime train, which it looks like they do. MGWR has a permanent train, so it's safe from that. getting a more direct route into Dublin and running for 140. Is actually going to exchange for the 10. So we are now facing D's. And there is an 8 in the market. That 8 in the market could be a little bit of a blessing for the CBSCR if she wants to emergency buy the 8 rather than a D. But I think actually she would be forced to emergency buy a 3 prime, so actually probably not going to matter. WLR running an 8 for 230. CBSCR is trainless as noted and does buy the 3 prime for $150 of her own personal cash. Looking at the companies, nobody is really in a position to bring out a D train, which costs $700. I don't think we'll be seeing any new companies float. It doesn't look like there's any companies to float. So I think we've reached a pretty stagnant game state. David is almost $1,000 ahead of his closest competitor, who is running just a 3 prime train. So I think we can pretty safely call this for David. Agnes has 2 10 trains, which are going to be better than his 8 trains. However, she doesn't have the runs to really take advantage of them, especially if this D train doesn't come out and give us gray tiles. So I feel pretty confident that David's going to win. I think we can probably, well, let's finish this stock operating round, go into the stock round, and then we can probably call it. 8 train is running for 200, which pays. Agnes running a 10 train and is going to have access to run through Dublin. So running for 200. But I think that's exactly what the 8 train ran for, right? Yeah, so her 10 train is running for the same as the 10, or sorry, the 10 train is running for the same as the 8, and it's not going to be able to catch up as a result. MGWR has managed to lay a big loop into Cork, so it's going to have a little bit of a better run as a result of that, and is running a 10 train for just 190. MRNC running a 3 prime train, runs that for 130. WLWR running an 8, and that's for 230. So again, David's 8 trains are outperforming the 10 trains just as a result of him having presidencies that were floated earlier and had better opportunity to lay track and tokens. CBSCR, another 3 prime train, upgrading some DITs, presumably hoping for increased revenue later, but the game is so late, it's not going to have any impact. So the bank did not break. We have $500 left. David has $1,000 ahead of all of his closest competitors. He has, the highest revenues in the game and has no train liability. So David has won this game. I don't think that we really even need to watch this stock round. I take it back. There is a company that could come out to bring out the D train, but whoever floats that is guaranteeing that they basically end up in last place because it's only going to run once. Even if it floats at 100, 2 companies are going to operate before it, which would not be enough to break the bank, actually. So we will see them have the opportunity to bring out the D if someone wants to float that. We'll just skip to the end of the stock round, see if anybody floats it. Looks like someone did. Dora. She has $600, which is actually not enough even to bring out the D train. So she's going to be dipping into her own cash for that. Actually, it looks like she can buy an 8. So we probably will not see the D come out even, which is in her own best interest. Otherwise, she'd be rusting her own train. So I think we'll see her buy the 8, which is certainly not going to be enough to give her the win, and probably will be enough to let these other players catch her and end up in last place because this is only going to run once and the bank will still break. So I don't think we need to delay the inevitable here. We'll skip to the end of the game. The bank did break at the end of operating round 10. David takes this by a very healthy margin, and Dora does end up in last. Um, Looking at the map, doesn't look like there were too many surprises. One thing I guess I neglected was that by floating a new company, Dora did have the opportunity to token in Dublin and cut other people's runs. But if we look at David's runs, it looks like he was pretty unaffected. He was running for 200 and 230 in stock round 9 and was able to actually make them even a little bit better despite that token. So he takes a well deserved win, and that is another game of 18 Ireland for the channel. Um, I think we probably will move away from this title moving forward. I don't know that it's been very popular in terms of our videos, and also just doesn't seem to be played very much on the site. Again, I do think there are some interesting things in this game, but the start of the game in particular can be a little bit of a bear as you're running these minor companies with really no options on the map and just waiting for people to have enough cash to kick off the train start. I think that's an intentional design element, so I can't criticize the game for it, but it's one that I think limits appeal for many people. All right, well, thank you for watching, and again, Happy New Year. Track Talk will be back again with more commentated games in the future.